Welcome back to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're hanging out with me today because we are stepping into a world that is just delightfully chaotic. It's deeply flawed and honestly highly dramatic. I'm talking, of course, about ancient Greek myths. If you think modern reality TV or your own family dramas have a lot of tension, trust me, you haven't seen anything yet. In this explainer, we're going to break down the absolutely incredible origins, the brutal rivalries, and the unbelievable magic of the gods, heroes, and monsters that basically defined ancient storytelling. So here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the ultimate family drama. Then we'll head down to the rulers of the underworld. After that, we'll take a look at flawed heroes and dirty work, and we'll wrap it all up with love, war, and sorcery. All right, Section 1, the ultimate family drama, sibling rivalries and bizarre origins. Let's dive right in. Okay, we kind of have to start with Zeus, right? We usually think of him as the head man, the absolute top dog. But surprisingly, he was actually the youngest sibling of the original Olympians. See, his dad, the Titan Kronos, had this terrible, terrible habit of swallowing his children whole because he was terrified they'd overthrow him. And because they were gods, they didn't, digest. They just kept growing right there in his stomach. So to save baby Zeus, his mom actually swapped him out for an infant-sized rock, which Kronos swallowed without even checking. Wild, right? Baby Zeus was then shipped off to the island of Crete, where he was literally raised by a mother goat named Amalthea. He eventually grew up, came back, rescued his swallowed siblings from their tummy trap, and took over as king. I mean, talk about the ultimate glow-up for a youngest sibling. Now check out this massive rivalry between Zeus's brother Poseidon and Zeus's daughter Athena. They both wanted to be the patron god of this one city originally called Cecropia. So Zeus told the citizens, hey, just vote based on who gives you the best gift. Poseidon, being the god of the sea and earthquakes, strikes the ground with his trident and boom, creates a rushing spring. Super flashy, right? But it was saltwater. You literally couldn't drink it. You couldn't water your crops with it. It was useless. Athena, on the other hand, the goddess of wisdom and battle strategy, gave them the olive tree. It gave them food, shade, and building resources. It was a classic case of practical wisdom totally beating out flashy magic. Because of that highly practical gift, the citizens obviously voted for Athena, and they renamed their city Athens in her honor. I absolutely love this quote from our source material because it points out a hilarious alternate reality. Think about it. If the citizens hadn't chosen Athena's olive tree and went with the god of the sea instead, the capital of Greece today might literally be Poseidon Ho. And listen, the strangeness does not stop there. Just look at the bizarre origin story of Athena herself. Zeus found out that the Titan goddess Metis was pregnant, and his reaction was to just swallow her whole. A few days later, Zeus gets this splitting, terrible headache. The clever god Hermes figures out what's going on, and has Hephaestus, the blacksmith god, crack Zeus's skull open with a hammer and chisel. Don't worry, Zeus was totally fine. But out pops Athena, completely skipping childhood. She emerges fully dressed in armor, carrying a spear and a shield, just 100% ready to dispense wisdom and battle advice from day one. Moving right along to Section 2, Rulers of the Underworld, Kidnappings, Tricks, and Eternal Punishments. So the underworld was ruled by Hades. And fun fact, he didn't actually choose it. He literally drew the short straw when dividing up the realms with Zeus and Poseidon. Because the underworld was strictly meant for the dead, it ironically became the most visited off-limits place in all of mythology. Mortals and demigods were just constantly sneaking in. Take Theseus and Persephone, for example. They snuck in to kidnap Hades' wife, Persephone. Huge mistake. Hades very calmly invited them to sit down, and boom, trapped them in these magical, mind-erasing stone chairs. They definitely paid a heavy, heavy price for crossing the ruler of the dead. And speaking of Persephone, she was the queen of the underworld, though she was definitely a reluctant wife. Hades had tricked and kidnapped her. Her mother, Demeter, is the goddess of the harvest. And this very intense family dynamic is actually how the ancient Greeks explained the changing of the seasons. When Persephone is forced to be away in the underworld, her mother mourns and the crops wither and die. But when she finally returns to the surface, the temperature warms up and all the flowers bloom. But hey, do not mistake Persephone for being a pushover. A mortal named Sisyphus actually tried to play her once. He asked her to release him from the underworld, claiming he needed to go back and haunt his wife because she didn't bury him properly. Well, it was a complete lie. He really just wanted to get back to his mortal body so he could live longer. When he finally got caught, his eternal punishment was just grueling. He was doomed to roll this giant boulder all the way up a massive hill, only to watch it roll right back down and then push it up again, literally for all eternity. All right, that brings us to Section 3, Flawed Heroes and Dirty Work. Down in the mortal realm, we see this really important truth emerge. Even the greatest heroes fail. But why do they fail? Well, it's usually because of intense human hubris, arrogance, or just acting on petty impulses that really anger the gods. And whenever they make those terrible, short-sighted choices, they are the ones who have to clean up the monumental messes.
Take Heracles, for instance. And real quick note, it's Heracles, not the Roman name Hercules. The guy was basically like Superman with a club. But because he made some truly awful choices driven by those exact human flaws we just talked about, the goddess Hera demanded he performed these epic labors to atone for what he'd done. Now, the full myth includes a total of 12 labors, but our source specifically highlights a few of the most intense ones. Fighting the multi-headed Hydra, hunting down a mythically sized boar, sneaking into the underworld, and shoveling thousands of animals' poop.
Yep, you read that last bullet point right. King Augeas had this massive collection of animals, and his stables were unimaginably filthy. Heracles takes one look and realizes that even with his godlike strength, this is way, way too much to shuffle by hand. So he uses his brain. He dug a giant trench and literally diverted a nearby river to wash all the stinky poo away. It's a great reminder that sometimes even superpowered heroes just have to use clever engineering to do the literal dirty work. And speaking of using your brain, let's look at Odysseus. He's often celebrated as the absolute cleverest of all the Greeks. The guy had a wildly impressive resume of cunning accomplishments. I mean, he framed an enemy for espionage. He tricked a deadly Cyclops into believing his name was Nobody. And famously, he planned the Trojan horse, hiding the Greek army inside a giant wooden peace offering to finally breach the impenetrable walls of Troy. The wildest part of all of this? Every single one of these things happened before his famous story, The Odyssey, even started. But here's the catch. Cleverness only gets you so far if you let your hubris make a god mad. Check out the timeline of his journey here. Year 0, the Trojan War ends. Odysseus' expected trip back home, it should have taken about 2 weeks. 2 weeks! But he made a terrible, arrogant mistake. He angered Poseidon, the god of the sea, who is pretty much famous for never letting things go. Because of that mythological grudge, his simple 2-week trip turned into a brutal 10-year nightmare. Actions in this world have massive, massive consequences. Which brings us to our final section. Number 4, love, war, and sorcery, the chaos makers. Let's start with Dionysus. He's Mount Olympus's resident party animal and the god of wine. His origin story is completely insane. As a baby, a deeply jealous Hera actually had him torn apart and eaten by titans. The only thing that survived was his tiny little heart. So what does Zeus do? He takes that heart, mashes it into a drink, and gives it to a mortal woman named Semele so she could give birth to Dionysus all over again. As our source materials sarcastically points out, yeah, a super normal thing to do, right? Then we have Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty. She wasn't born like the other gods at all. She literally rose fully grown from the sea foam. And she was a massive chaos creator. She actually kicked off the entire Trojan War by causing Helen to fall in love with a Trojan prince, and then she actively worked for the Trojan side the whole time. She also had 18 children, her absolute favorite being Eros, who the Romans called Cupid. Eros caused total havoc with his love arrows, but ironically, when Eros himself fell in love, the goddess of love was absolutely not thrilled about it. Finally, we have Circe. Sometimes you'll hear it pronounced Kirky. She is basically the unofficial goddess of sorcery, and she's this fascinating figure because she's incredibly multi-talented, but also wildly unpredictable. Depending on how she felt about you on any given day, she could grant you incredible immortality, or she could just turn you into a pig. It really was a coin toss with her. While she's mostly famous for eventually helping out Odysseus, she has a much darker history that is deeply rooted in extreme jealousy. And that dark history involves a sea nymph named Scylla. See, when Circe was younger, she fell hard for a sea god named Glaucus. The problem? Glaucus had a massive crush on Scylla. Well, Circe did not take this well at all. To completely eliminate her competition, she used her dark magic to turn Scylla into a horrific sea monster. We're talking 6 heads, 12 dangling feet, and a terrifying voice that sounded exactly like yelping dogs. All of this just because they liked the same guy. Which brings us to our final thought today, and a question I really want to leave you with. When you look back at everything we've covered, the intense sibling rivalries, the eternal punishments, the hubris of heroes, and just the sheer terrifying jealousy of these deities, if you lived in this chaotic world of petty gods and dangerous magic, how on earth would you survive meeting someone like Circe? It really makes you appreciate just how perilous and drama-filled ancient mythology truly is. Thank you so much for diving into this with me on The Explainer. I hope mapping it out like this helped bring these incredible source materials to life for you. Keep on learning, and I'll see you next time.